Good morning, everyone from the Solomon family. I'm Ryan.
I'm Titus.
I'm Avani.
And I'm Adero.
We're all dressed and ready for church, and I hope you are too.
Bienvenidos, saludos de la familia Barba. Nos extrañamos mucho, los queremos mucho y esperamos verlos a todos pronto. Que tengan un lindo día.
Bendiciones.
Digan, chao.
Good morning, church. Well, I think you would agree that 2020 will be a year to remember. Between the pandemic with COVID-19 and just the state of affairs in our country in regards to race relations, have made this a very challenging year. We've now seen the aftermath of the murder of Mr. George Floyd. And over the last week and a half, we've seen people protesting in all 50 states and as well as many countries around the world. From New Zealand to Australia, to Japan, to Zimbabwe, to Sweden, to Germany, to France, UK, and Canada. That's just to name a few. The cries for justice are being heard all over the world. And, this week we've been having a lot of discussions, especially in our morning devotionals. And also, hopefully we've been having individual conversations with one another as well. Hopefully those conversations are not just with people who completely agree with us, but that we're really seeking to understand one another. Now, I realize some of us are more prepared for those conversations than others. But now is a time where we should be seeking to actually make a difference in this world. The proper biblical response to seeing pain all around you should be, what can I do? What can we do? How can we help? That is the proper biblical response to seeing pain go on all around you. And so today, we're going to begin a 3-part series. We're going to talk about dealing with your heart, then working on your home, and working in your community. Today, my sermon is entitled, Start with Your Heart. Start with your heart. We are all called to be a light in this world. And one of the ways that we could really be a light to this world is to really be able to engage in serious conversations with one another. But the thing is, in order for us to really make a difference and communicate at a heart level, we must examine our own hearts first. You can't effectively communicate at a heart level if you're unwilling to deal with your own heart first. If you sincerely want to make a difference, it is important, it is critical that you examine your heart first. I realize we're all at different places. Some of us are really at the beginning of really examining our hearts. Some of us have been examining our hearts for a while. We're at different places. And you might find yourself heavy-hearted. You might find yourself tired. There are different levels of where we're at. I will tell you from my perspective in talking to people, I do believe there is serious progress being made right now. I think there are real conversations happening right now. There are topics that are uncomfortable that we're really talking about and discussing at a heart level that we need to if we really want to shine today. It doesn't take a whole lot of work to just react like the world does. But it takes us really examining our hearts first, if we really want to be a light in this world. You know, God knows and cares deeply about the condition of our hearts. He always has and always will. He knows exactly what's in our heart. We could deny it to people. We could deny it to ourselves. And yet God sees right through it and knows exactly what's going on. You know, a pretty sobering view of this is found in Genesis chapter 6. I'm going to start reading verses 5 through 7. It says, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. The Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." It's a pretty challenging passage. It's pretty sobering. It shows us that God can be deeply troubled when he sees evil in human hearts. It says that the Lord regretted that he made human beings on the earth. I mean, think about the condition of the hearts for him to have that regret. He says his heart was deeply troubled because of the thoughts of the human heart were evil all the time. It troubled God. And he said, you know what? I'm going to have to wipe them all out and start all over with just 8. You know, one of the other things that we notice in this passage is that God sees us as one human race. But unfortunately, we don't live in a world that sees it that way. We live in a world where race was constructed as a way to oppress people. And people have been crushed by that. People are being killed because of that. And we have brothers and sisters who hurt deeply because of that. And as Christians, we must really examine our own hearts so that we could really make a difference in this world. Unfortunately, until Jesus returns, there will be racism in this world. That's just an unfortunate fact. There will be racism in this world. But as Christians, what should our response be to that? I want to go a little level deeper. In your heart, what is your response to that? In your heart, do you believe that people should just accept it because it's part of living in this world? In your heart. You know, Jesus says that we will always have the poor among us. Should we be giving up caring for the poor? I mean, after all, we'll always have the poor among us, so maybe we should focus on telling the poor to get used to it because it's part of living in this world. How about the idea that Jesus says that most people will be on that broad road that leads to destruction? Very few will find that narrow road that leads to life. Well, should we stop trying to teach people about God and save people? Because after all, they're not going to listen anyway. So many people are going to ignore us. So, should we just stop trying? Now, I know that we would know the right answers to say in a public setting on this matter. I would hope so. I'm asking you what's actually in your heart. Examining our hearts is a critical step in really making a change. But sometimes we have to be willing to ask ourselves some pretty tough questions. Maybe questions we don't really want to answer because it might expose what's actually really in there. I'll give you a question to ask yourself like this. Am I vocally outraged by the illegal acts of looters and the damage to property, but silent about the murder of a man at the hands of officers whose job is to protect and serve? In your heart, how do you think about this? How do you look at what's going on? You know, I have to be honest, I was encouraged this week to see police chiefs around the country speak out about what they saw that was clearly wrong. I don't know that I've ever seen that actually happen. Usually, you know, if you're a policeman or a police chief, usually you don't speak out against another police officer that was clearly in the wrong. In some cities, police even marched alongside their community. Now, I'm not under any illusion that this means we've got it figured out. But I believe it's a sign that there's an effort being made to really understand the issue. You know, the truth is, as Christians, I don't believe we're going to fix systems with new systems. I don't believe that that's really where, as Christians, we should be pouring our hearts into. Because the truth is, the condition of the heart is always the biggest issue. If you want to make a difference, you must examine your own heart. Yeah, I get that you want to help other hearts. I'm saying in order for you to help other hearts, you have to examine your own heart first. See, we can't have meaningful and productive conversations with people if we are unwilling to deal with our own hearts. It's going to spill out. Jesus told us that in Luke 6, verse 45, he says, a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings out evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. It's going to come out. And these conversations are hard enough. We've got to make sure we deal with our own hearts first. And I'm encouraged. I've seen several who I really believe are just really ready to have real conversations. And I believe we've made some enormous progress, honestly, even in just this last week. I also realize there are many of us that haven't seen or listened to any of the devotionals and haven't really examined their own hearts, and so they might be in the same place they were 2 weeks ago. I want to encourage you to really take some time to examine your heart. If we could all take time, even if we think we're ready and we understand it and we get it, say, okay, God, let me stop and make sure that I'm examining my own heart. We need to have communication with each other in a way that is to seek understanding. See, as a disciple, You cannot approach a conversation with vindictiveness in your heart. That is, if you count on having a productive conversation. We have to really seek to understand the other person's perspective. It needs to be okay for questions to be asked both ways so that we could truly understand each other's perspective. I would imagine that we have white brothers and sisters that have questions but are afraid to ask because they don't want to be labeled as racist. And I say to the brothers and sisters of color, we need to help our brothers and sisters to God's glory. It needs to be different in the church. If you are a brother or sister of color, give your white brothers and sisters the benefit of the doubt. Don't treat them as the world does. White brothers and sisters, don't minimize your brother or sister's experiences, your brother or sisters of color and their experiences like the world has. One of the most hurtful things that I've heard from brothers and sisters of color is when they've communicated with disciples about what they've experienced and their experiences were minimized or diminished. I want you to understand how hurtful that could be for God's people. Another thing I want to really encourage you to do, and this one is a personal pet peeve of mine, so I'm going to try not to go on a little mini rant here. But we must divorce political ideologies from these conversations. I'm going to say that one more time. We must divorce political ideologies from these conversations. I was telling a brother this week, any conversation on race in any circumstances is going to be difficult. But you add politics into it, oh my goodness, it makes it 10 times harder. And it really doesn't have to be that way. Political parties, and I will add, on both sides of the aisle, have kidnapped moral issues and made them political. So that in the church, we can't engage in it because if we are, we're getting political. This has got to stop. This is a huge issue and a huge hindrance to us really glorifying God in this area. I think it's a much bigger issue than we realize. The question I ask you is, in your heart, can you separate politics and just deal with the issue at hand? Can you really do that? In your heart. Because you're not going to be able to deal with the issue at hand if you got the political commentators or your favorite politician in your ear and you bring and regurgitate their ideas. We are not going to make progress unless we could get that out the way and say, I'm talking to my brother or my sister, and I'm not going to bring politics into this. But see, that has to happen at a heart level. Because what happens is if it doesn't happen at a heart level, even as you're listening, you're thinking of a political rebuttal. I've seen it happen. And it's sad. It's really sad. And I want you to really examine your own heart. I know many of us in our church, we're not overly political, and I thank God for that. It makes conversations like this not easy, but easier. But if you are highly political, I want to encourage you to take some extra time. And I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. If you are highly political, take some time, take a step back and say, wait a second, let me check this at the door. Because I can't have a real conversation with my brother or sister unless I actually do that. See, if you don't deal with your own heart in this area and whatever area, is going to come out in your conversations. It's going to spill out. You know, there's an old saying that goes, what's down in the well comes up in the bucket. If it's in your heart, it's going to come up. This is why we have to deal with our hearts. You want to make a difference? Start with your heart. I want to give you a little bit of a challenge. And get ready, because this is pretty challenging, and this is for everyone, for all of us. This is something I'm going to do. I want you to take this challenge. David, in Psalm 26, verse 2, he says, "Test me, Lord, and try me. Examine my heart and my mind." You know, in context, he's kind of saying, "Hey, God, I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm totally with you. Look at, where I'm at. This is what I'm about. Test me. Examine my heart and mind." I challenge all of us to go to God in prayer and say, "God, test me. Examine my heart and my mind." And I'm not talking about the testing of test me to sin or with temptation. That's not what I'm talking. I'm saying really examine my heart and my mind and expose if there's any evil in there. Expose if there's anything contrary to you and your scriptures in my heart, so that I could have a real and productive conversation with my brother or sister. Now, don't go rushing into that prayer without taking careful consideration as to what you're asking God to do. This is not something to be taken lightly. Remember, you're asking God to examine your heart and to expose what's in it. You're not asking God to expose other people's hearts. You're asking God to expose what's in your heart so that you can glorify Him even in this area as you have conversations with one another. I pray that you could take that challenge with me. Now, I realize some of us, we might feel like we're ready. I'm just asking you, just take a moment and say, "Okay, God, let me make sure that I'm examining my own heart first." So that any conversation that I have, whether it be on race or whatever it may be, that it can glorify you, God. Expose it. If I don't see it, if I don't understand it, please expose it. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 4, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." What we say and do comes from what's going on in our hearts. That's why we've got to make sure that we take some time to examine our own hearts so that we could really have conversations that glorify God. Jesus, before he gets arrested and before he goes to the cross, in verse 20, he says, "My prayer is not for them alone." And this is, he initially just prayed for the disciples. Now he says, "I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message." That's you and I. "That all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me." We've read this before. Many of us know this passage. Jesus is here praying for you and I, for us, to have a supernatural unity. And I call it supernatural unity because he's saying he wants us as a church to have a unity like he and the Father have. That's a supernatural unity. One that is so astonishing to the world that it will communicate. It will testify to the fact that Jesus is the Son of God. You know, it's interesting because I've heard so much, and I think intuition sometimes tells you, oh well, it would seem like this conversation really shouldn't be had because talking about race is divisive. It's ironic because I think it actually exposes how we're not as unified as we really think we are. It actually exposes that we're not experiencing the kind of unity that Jesus prayed for. We're certainly not united in this complete way that Jesus is talking about. See, unless we could have difficult talks with one another on difficult topics that are uncomfortable, the truth is we only have a superficial unity, not a supernatural unity. I get it. It's hard to have these conversations for everyone. Being in these conversations, I'm Latino. Sometimes it's hard, I'm not white, I'm not black, and I'm listening to the conversations, and there's some things I can relate to, some things I can't, but it's important that we all get engaged. But here's the thing. One of the challenges we have as a church, that this topic of race and how we view one another and how we treat one another and how people are treated in this world is not really a black and white issue. To me, this is a human issue. We're incredibly diverse, and so that makes these talks incredibly challenging because we have different cultural perspectives, even within race. But here's the thing. We're also set up to glorify God in an incredible way because of that diversity. Because we're so different, because we have all these experiences, because we don't all have the same experiences in our life, we can glorify God. Because people can see, wow, this group is so diverse, and yet they're so incredibly unified. We are set up to glorify God in an unbelievable way. Can you imagine if every brother and sister could see what's going on in the world and maybe experience something negative in the world with someone of a different race than they are? But imagine that they could experience that and say, but you know what? But when I go to church, not only can I talk about my experience, I could talk about my experience with people of different races, and I'm going to be accepted. I'm going to be listened to. I'm going to be seen for who I am. People will know me and love me. See, the church should be a refuge from the world when we could talk freely and carry each other's burdens so that the world will know we are his disciples and that Jesus is the Son of God. See, if we do this God's way, if we examine our hearts and we really seek to do this God's way, we will experience something at a new level that Jesus prayed about 2,000 years ago. God will do it. We have to do it his way. One of the most encouraging times, and you might disagree, depending on where you're at in this process, one of the most encouraging times for me as a Christian was Thursday night. And I realized we're still working through a ton of things, but it was so encouraging to hear the hope in so many disciples and figuring out how we can make a difference. Honestly, it made me so proud of the church. It made me so proud to see the young people sharing as well. They have an incredible stake in all of this. It was so encouraging to hear that hope and how they could see us making a difference in this world. I'm hopeful. I see a way forward where we can come out of this and say, God did something incredible in us. That people in the world will look and say, whoa, they're all so different, but they're not just together playing nice. They really sought to understand one another, and they carry each other's burdens. They fight for one another. They encourage one another. That's how we can really glorify God. So I say to you, you want to make a difference? Start with your heart. Start there first. Examine and make sure that you get rid of whatever may be in your heart so that you could really glorify God. See, not only can we make a difference, we will make a difference. We were made new in Christ because God intends on making a difference through us individually and as a church. I want to encourage you every moment that you get discouraged. Every moment that you think, how can we do this? I want you to remember that Jesus prayed for you and I in advance so that we could be a light to the world. So let's glorify God. Let's remember what Jesus prayed for and what he died for. Let's remember that so that we could really seek to glorify him. Let's remember it starts with your heart. And from there, we will see God do incredible things through us. The cross is an incredible reminder of what God can do through pain. It's an incredible reminder of why we have hope even while we're in this world. We can be different because God has called us to be different. Let's go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for just loving us the way you do, Father. We thank you, Father, that you brought us together from so many different countries in the world, Father, that you brought us together so that we could glorify you. God, I pray that we could capture a vision of what you want to do through us and in us, Father. I pray, God, that as we take this bread and juice, in remembrance of your Son and the sacrifice that he made for us, Father, I pray that we remember that sacrifice when the times get hard, Father, but that we remember that sacrifice in knowing that we needed it so that we could be forgiven, so that we could walk with you. God, I pray that you just help us. Help us, Father, to be grateful for the sacrifice that was made for us, and help us, Father, to take this communion with gratitude in our hearts, and to remember, Father, that you seek for us to be a light in this world. God, we love you. We thank you. We pray all this in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Trials in my way.
Trials in my way.
Gotta pray all the time.
Gotta pray all the time.
Trials in my way.
Trials in my way.
Gotta pray all the time.
Gotta pray all the time.
Don't you know that my Jesus,
He will fix it.
Don't you know that Jesus,
He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that my Jesus,
He will fix it in a while. In a while.
Satan's on the attack.
When Satan's on the attack,
You know you gotta fight back.
you know you gotta fight back.
Satan's on the attack.
Satan's on the
You
attack.
know you gotta fight back.
You know you gotta fight back.
Don't you know that my Jesus,
He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that Jesus,
He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that my Jesus,
He will fix it in a while. in a while.
Sometimes I feel like giving up,
Sometimes I feel like giving up,
but I remember the cross.
but I remember the cross.
Sometimes I feel like giving in,
Sometimes I feel like giving
but I
in,
remember the law.
but I remember the law.
Don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix it in a while,
oh,
in a while.
and if you had a bad day,
And if you had a bad day,
get on your knees and pray.
get on your knees and pray.
If you had a bad day,
If you had a bad day,
pray.
get on your knees and pray.
Well, don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix it in a while,
oh,
in a while.
in my way,
Trials in my way,
gotta pray all the time.
gotta pray all the time.
Trials in my way,
Trials in my way,
gotta pray all the time.
gotta pray all the time.
Well, don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix
well,
it.
don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix it in a while,
oh,
in a while.
don't you know that my Jesus,
My Jesus, He will fix it.
trials in my way,
My Jesus, He will fix it.
trials in my way,
My Jesus, He will fix it in a while,
oh,
in a while.
Let the Spirit of the Lord rise among us. Let the Spirit of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of our King rise among us. Let it rise. Sing, oh, let it rise. Let the songs of the Lord, let the songs of the Lord rise among us. Let the songs of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of our King rise among us. Let it rise. Sing, oh, let it rise. Let the glory of the Lord, let the glory of the Lord rise among us. Let the glory of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of our King rise among us. Let it rise. Let it rise. Let the peace of the Lord, let the peace of the Lord rise among us. Let the peace of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of our King rise among us. Let it rise. Let it rise. Let the joy of the Lord, let the joy of the Lord, let it rise among us. Let the joy of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of our King rise among us. Let it rise. Let the joy of the Lord, let it rise among us. Let the joy of the Lord rise among us. Let the praises of our King rise among us. Let it rise.
Someday.